During the webinar, you may submit your questions through the questions box in your webinar window. We will commit to getting your questions answered. At this time, I will turn it over to Chris to begin the first portion of our webinar.
Great, thank you for the introduction, Woody, and thank you all for joining us today. A really interesting topic, the current and future state of risk analytics. Really important topic to talk about. You know, as you heard from Woody, I've been covering governance, risk, and compliance here for Forrester. I lead the coverage here for the last about 7 years, and obviously in that time, the term analytics has probably been batted around quite a bit, but has evolved very clearly and I think very impressively over time to really be a lot more about, you know, you're gathering all this information, you're doing all these different risk, compliance, audits, different functions. How do you actually turn that information to something that's practical for the business? So as much as possible, we want to take a look at, you know, what are analytics? First of all, that's very important, and then also, you know, how are we going to apply them to the business? So my outline is very straightforward. I'll talk about just 3 things before I turn it over to Ahmad. Current state of risk analytics. What are we striving for right now? You know, where is the progress going toward right now? And then what does the future hold? And really the objective here is to look at what should you all on the phone that are responsible in some part for risk, for compliance, for audit, for governance, what should you be thinking about over time with regard to internal processes, internal objectives, and of course technology? How does technology support those organizational objectives? So on the next slide, I'll dive right into its current state of risk analytics. Really what we see right now is risk analytics are primarily suited for a health check. If you think about this thermometer, it's a point in time, how are we doing? The input, certainly lots of types of input are being used now for analytics, but there's a lot of manual input right now with regard to risk analytics. A lot of risk assessments, a lot of surveys, a lot of attestations. You know, certainly there are pockets of the organization, some aspects of finance, some aspects of IT specifically, that have pretty good data and some good automation of data aggregation, but really it's a focus on aggregation. It's how do you reach across the organization with surveys, with attestations, with manual processes, as well as, again, some bits and pieces where you have some technology capabilities, aggregate all that data into one place. You know, the characteristics, it's very specialized in that, you know, you're looking for aggregation points for a single purpose. That is a compliance or regulatory requirement, a report that you're trying to put together to respond to a third-party partner request, to an auditor, to a regulator or examiner. It's a specialized report. Sometimes it's an ad hoc report, but again, the focus is really aggregation. And it's usually infrequent. So this is not necessarily an ongoing you know, dashboard that changes as you look at it. This is much more frequently going to be a report that you run to see a point in time case. What does my risk posture look like right now? What does my compliance posture look right now with regard to all these different regulatory requirements? And the benefits, there are definitely benefits out there. There are you know, a lot of good analytical technology and a lot of good analytical processes in place. The primary benefits that I've seen with customers really fall into 2 categories. One is for internal operations, for internal decision makers to prioritize their tactics. This would be allocation of resources, allocation of budget, allocation of time, you know, looking across all of my different areas of security, for example, say which ones do we need more help on, you know, which ones do we have more risk exposure. You know, maybe there's you know, something similar going on in finance, maybe in your supply chain or in your operations, but it's really about those allocation of resources and investment and you know, people's time. The other is progress reporting. So progress reporting is more for external decision makers or external authorities. Sometimes this is internal as well. Obviously, if you have you know, a risk committee or some of your executives or management are interested in your risk posture, that's, you know, a good and bad thing. I think a lot of the risk professionals that I talk to, have been looking for a long time, how do they get more executive visibility and organizational visibility? Now that they're getting it, now they have to scramble a little bit to find a way to display the information about what they're doing in a way that makes sense for the business. So Forrester has a lot of customers in IT, so the IT risk professionals that I work with quite a bit, really scrambling over the last couple of years to not just allocate resources better, but how do you turn all of this security and risk data into something that's relevant to the business. And that's happening across the organization as well. I mentioned these other areas like finance, operations, your vendor and third-party landscape. There are risk implications that happen all over the business, so there's a big struggle right now within the risk organization, within the risk function or functions, to change all that data into meaningful business decision support. So that's what we're striving for now. So I'll go on to the next slide. Basically, what are we striving for now? This desired state, when I talk to individuals about what kind of technologies and processes they're putting into place, it's really about contextual intelligence. It's putting all of this information into the context of business processes, business functions, and business decisions. The input, manual and automated, there's certainly a lot more automation that goes on right now, and certainly a lot of the investments, a lot of the initiatives that I'm seeing right now are purposely in place to make this automation happen more often. Certainly just if you think about the number of different stakeholders you have internally and externally, the amount of data you have, it's not scalable if you aren't doing some sort of automation in the aggregation of all that data. So that transition to automation is a big emphasis right now. There's also starting to be a focus on normalization. So I mentioned all these different silos in the organization that have a risk data or data that's relevant to risk. A lot of times they're in different systems, they're in different processes, even the manual processes don't necessarily align. Great example, I was actually on the phone earlier today. I'm putting together a workshop next week for a lot of clients looking at their risk taxonomy. So we're running a couple-hour workshop next week, and all of them kind of sent their taxonomies over ahead of time for analysis and review. And their taxonomies have multiple impact charts. Some of them are on a 1 through 5 scale, some are on a 1 through 10 scale. And having different impact charts is okay. You have to measure risk in different ways depending on the type of function that you're in. But if they can't align, if one group is measuring 1 through 4 and one is 1 through 10, there's no way for somebody above those two groups to look at that data and make comparable decisions between the two. So you have to start to think about normalization. How do you compare the risks related to information security, vulnerabilities, and threats, compare those to your operational threats, compared to your vendor risks, your third-party risks, or your business continuity risks, and things like that. So this idea of normalization is very, very important for analytics right now. The characteristics that companies are striving for currently, certainly more relevance to stakeholder needs. I mentioned before that the current state is much more about single point-in-time reports. This is more about a stakeholder, finding a stakeholder like your CFO, your CIO, maybe your CRO or COO, and saying, what does that person need to have to be able to handle risk and understand risk better? What kind of needs do they have on a regular basis, not just related to risk? Your head of HR is trying to do things like improve company morale, improve retention rates, improve their ability to hire new people and ramp them very quickly. So you have to think about, okay, what do those individuals need to do their job better, and maybe what are the risk data points that I can provide to them on a regular basis to help them. Maybe HR isn't the best example. I think only the most mature companies are thinking about that level, but certainly CFO, CIO, COO, CRO are all thinking along those lines. And also targeted delivery. This is new, but if you think about how all of these different individual functions do their business, they don't necessarily need all of the risk data all of the time. Sometimes they need a massive report at the end of the quarter or end of the month, but in many cases you'll find that they'll need specific data within part of their process. So that's where the idea of contextual intelligence comes. Now, if you think about the vendor review, approval, and then signing process internally, one customer I've been talking to quite a bit lately, they have 80 different steps in that process, from first defining requirements for a third party, identifying that short list, going through contract review and approval, signing off on that vendor, and then putting them into operational practice. And so what the head of risk did for this organization was say, in 4 or 5 of those 80 steps, I'm going to insert the risk management function. We're going to deliver data to help them understand what are the risk implications of different vendors. If you say, I want to outsource a function to Eastern Europe or South America or the Middle East, there are financial decisions you have to make there, financial implications. There are operational implications, but there are also major risk and compliance implications. So you're thinking about, how can I take that targeted delivery approach and say, at this stage in the process, I want to deliver the right analytics to help that individual make that decision. And so the benefits here are decision support and also investment justification. So you can say after the fact, look, I chose this vendor and it's because of these financial, operational, and risk implications. I can go back and I can show the data that was supporting that decision. So that's the current initiatives that I'm seeing right now. Currently, organizations are striving to put that contextual intelligence into place. Now, some of this next, what does the future hold, might seem a little bit far out there, but as you think about what kind of capabilities you're putting into place right now, what are the elements that you're going to have as part of your risk organization, this next slide is, what does the future hold? And it's a lot more about comprehensive analysis. So with all these different data points, there is going to be a continued shift toward automation. So you're going to see mostly automated data points when possible. You'll never get to 0 manual processes for data collection and aggregation, but certainly with the amount of data out there, there's a big move toward more automation. And really, you want to look at risk and non-risk sources. So I mentioned this idea of making decisions with the idea of financial, operational, and risk implications. In many cases, there will be the same data points, right? So I'll go back to the example of a third-party decisions. A couple of the larger financial services organizations I've been working with, when they talk about their vendor risk management process, the initial data they collect in order to do risk scoring certainly looks at whether the vendor has anything to do with financial reporting or revenue generation, whether or not they handle sensitive intellectual property or customer information, things like that. But they also look at how big is that vendor? What does their performance history look like? Where are they located? A lot of data that impacts their risk score, but is not necessarily a risk data point. So there's a lot of these risk and non-risk sources at hand. And the characteristics, of course, focus on analysis. Maybe seems a little bit obvious if in a conversation about analytics. But the analysis here is looking at all of these different data points and actually making a educated guess based on that. You'll see a lot more emphasis on things like predictive analytics. Not just trending, but saying, here are a lot of interrelationships with data. If you put these interrelationships together, are we seeing any kind of anomalies? Would we expect to see anomalies over the next 1 to 2 years if we continue down this path? A lot of the vendors that are just getting to to this area, they do a lot around scenario analysis as well. So it's looking at, if I make decision A, B, or C, what will be the risk outcome, or what will be the financial outcome? So this focus on analysis is much more of an emphasis on that sort of prediction, scenario analysis kind of impact. And relevant to the big picture, again, might seem a little bit obvious, but as you're getting to the chief risk officer level, that's important to have the contextual analysis that I mentioned earlier. But here we're talking about comprehensive analysis that looks at how will risk affect our financial performance, our capital allocation requirements, maybe our strategic, our ability to execute on strategy and so forth. So it's much more about risk's impact on the overall health of the business as opposed to risk as a single indicator in itself. And the benefits are more about decision guidance. So actually walking through not just decision support, like here's one element that's going to help me make a better decision, but actually taking all of these factors into account. What is the best course of action for you to take? And by the way, when I'm talking about decision guidance, I do want to make the point and emphasize it that this will largely be focused on executives, maybe board level, maybe top management, but also there's some great case study examples out there of decision guidance at the front lines of the organization, from sales to marketing to customer support and service, individual operational functions as well. If you're able to give people at the front, the front end of your organization, the people that are interacting with the market, better risk data, they'll be making better decisions as well. We've seen some great examples where one individual or a couple individuals make poor decisions, and they have a dramatic impact on the organization itself. Whether that's a big data breach, whether that's a really poorly executed financial trade or transaction, or maybe a health and safety risk. If you're able to help those individuals make better decisions and have better oversight into those decisions, that's certainly helpful as well. And also investment and valuation, that goes with this decision guidance. So it's not just a after-the-fact look to justify the investment you made, but ahead of the fact, what are the best courses of action in the way that you invest your time, energy, resources, finances, and so forth. So that's a lot there. That's actually the end of my introduction portion of the webinar. I'm actually going to turn things over to Ahmad now. So maybe, Ahmad, just to get started, could you just do maybe a little brief introduction of Brinqa and talk a little bit about your views of risk analytics?
Thanks, Chris. And again, I want to thank everybody for joining and taking the time to join this webinar. And again, thanks, Chris, for your participation and your insights around risk analytics. Just to quickly introduce, I know some of you have already heard or know about Brinqa, working with Brinqa, but just in case you didn't, Brinqa provides a risk analytics platform for operational risk, for targeting primarily on the operational risk, including things like technology, security, under technology, logistics, business continuity, supply chain, and others. It's a holistic platform, addresses different use cases, and throughout this presentation today, we'll be looking at some individual areas and specific use cases. So getting back to your question about what we do, and then also, Chris, how we look at risk analytics. So if we move to the next slide, the way what we're seeing from our customers is a consistent request when it comes to managing, reporting, and analyzing risk is the number one issue that keeps coming up, and I think, Chris, you just talked about it as well, is need for a business context-based risk reporting. Analytics become really, really important and play a big role into adding and providing a business-specific, business context-based reporting that actually makes sense to stakeholders, either we're looking at technology, then we're talking about your app owners, your CIO minus one, and giving them the metrics that they can actually use to incorporate it in their decision-making processes. The other sort of a definition or part of the definition to us of what a risk analytics is, just to shift a little bit and talk about, for the last 10 years, I would say that there was a lot of emphasis and focus on compliance. We all, went through these exercises, projects, implemented various technologies and tools, and heavily focused. But a big shift that I see is happening, and that is that compliance is no longer the driver. There are a lot of factors. The economy the last few years have not been really good in terms of the budgets and resources available. But also, businesses and our customers are realizing and figuring it out that they need to do what's relevant to their business, what's best for them. And obviously, compliance laid out some good requirements. They cannot go through the process of implementing each and everything. So move away from that sort of checkbox approach, pick approach, to more of a risk-based approach to think about what's relevant, what's required to implement, and make data focused. So it's a big shift. It's a different way to think about it, and that's also what is part of risk analytics. And continuing on that theme, since now we're looking at things from a risk perspective, we need to prioritize risk. Everybody is coming to a point where we have two choices to make. Either we can create a book of work, or for us, every year, beginning of year, and work our way down and start again that cycle year after year, quarter after quarter. Or we can prioritize our work based on the risk-based, and instead of trying to eliminate it, try to really focus on things that matter to business at the end of the day. And that's true for technology, that's true for security as well. And it is happening. Some of the larger enterprises perhaps are leading in that regard to focus more and more on fewer things that matter the most, where you get the biggest bang for the buck, and using risk as the guide there. And the last piece, just to sort of tie that back to what Chris talked about, the automation. The tools like Brinqa, you were able to automate your aggregation process, your analysis process, and but there is a large amount of data, especially in the security world, the operational data that's available today for us to consume. It's no longer, it's not possible for you, even if you have some in-house tools, or you can build a few processes with some database technologies or a spreadsheet. You can do a certain extent of it, but with the volume, the variety, and the velocity of data that is actually generated, if you really want to consume it and use that as part of your decision-making process, you really want to have a data-driven approach, then that's where the risk analytics come and help you. So risk analytics, to me, just to answer your question or finish that, Chris, is not necessarily a one sort of simple definition. It's a combination of different things, requirements, and the utilization at the end of the day of the actual data that we have, and minimize the manual effort, the subjective approach to risk management that we have been using for the last 10, 15 years.
Yeah, okay, yeah, that's a fair point. So it's funny, I think if I went back through the last year, the types of inquiries that I'm getting from customers, I would say more than half of them are not about technology. Certainly Forrester covers technology very, very closely in this space, but I would say a lot more of my questions are about the organizational challenges. How do we actually start to create some structure around the way we measure and talk about and make decisions about risk? So next, if you could maybe talk a little bit about some of the key organizational challenges that you guys are working with.
Sure, absolutely. And again, as I mentioned, we cover different areas, different use cases that we have done audit, risk analysis, from regulatory risk analysis to technology. And I think for the today webinar, we want to focus technology, but also when you talk about implementing a risk analytics program, what are the key challenges? And without sort of leaving the non-technical issues aside, the number one challenge that I see our organization face when they embark upon any kind of a use case within the risk analytics is either not having a golden source of their inherent risk inventory, or having in multiple places varied or multiple risk repositories which are not correlated. And the challenge is that if you don't know what's critical to your business, there's not much you can do in terms of protecting that investment, or making a better decision, or supporting your business in terms of making a recommendation and providing guidance. So that seems to be the number one challenge, and this is where we also provide better technology and better processes to help organizations with that. But some of the side effects, and I'm pretty sure the audience on the call is familiar with some of these already, but just to highlight for a few folks, why the having disparate these inventories affect, other than that limits your ability for reporting, but it also, Chris, you talked about predictive analysis, you talked about forecasting. you cannot do that if you don't have a single source of risk. And it's not a physically single source, but it's a consistent, common, correlated source of risk information. And that's really key when we talk about analytics and able to do those predictive analysis, forecasting, recommendation types of analysis. It's just not possible to do that. The other big challenge that I see customers or organizations face today is it's a very manual aggregation process. In some cases, we're not actually utilizing the data we have, so that's kind of part of that. But also, where we are collecting the risk information is very inconsistent. There's sometimes the information that we're using for analysis is stale. The quality of data is not reliable, and and when you do get all this sort of together, either manually or you have some processes or tools that you have developed, there's a lot of challenges with correlation as well. So again, leading back to spending a lot of time and resources, and you're getting a picture, you're getting a data for analysis, and it's really not a clear picture. And again, a lot of things with analysis is, a lot of people use that terminology, that garbage in, garbage out. It's also very much relevant and true here. It's not there's no sort of magic to it. If you are going to feed inconsistent and poor quality data, your outcome is going to be reflective of that. The third challenge, and again, I think, Chris, going back to you commented on that based on your workshop this morning. It's very much, what I see all the time is there's no standard risk measurement approach within an organization. Every team, not just because they're siloed, they have established their own methodologies. They have established their own reporting approaches. And if I am a person who's on the receiving end, who's looking at these reports and trying to make some decisions, it's practically impossible to do that. So there's definitely a need for consistent. Now, it doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to follow a certain framework. It doesn't have to be the best in the industry, but it has to be the one that is consistent across your organization. A lot of time I feel, as an industry, we look for framework, or we look for some standard to solve our problems, where really the problem is on our side, where we just need to adapt a framework or a standard or just our own and just be consistent and stick to it. And the last, the challenge is faced today is definitely the folks who are actually, and this is very much true in security and technology world as well. When you're reporting security risk or technology risk, you're reporting in a way or in language that makes absolutely no sense to business. Business doesn't really care about how many breaches or what kind of malware or how many vulnerabilities or patches were fixed last year. They need more than that. They need an information that they could use to make their decisions. And the kind of reports we provide, very operational metrics, they usually are just overlooked because they don't have the type of information. Again, not repeating to what you said, Chris, but if you're an HR person, you're looking for how to increase the morale or how to increase the employee satisfaction, and how do you provide that? How does technology, even security? A lot of organizations have security policies where they're blocking a lot of these sites, and if you're looking and going after a younger population, they need some kind of a social networking type of access. Now, this all can be done within the policy as well, but you need to provide that feedback from a technology and security to HR so they can make the better decisions. So these are some of the challenges, Chris, that I see our customer face. Leaving technology aside, just overall, and pretty consistent across, regardless of if you're looking at a HR risk analytics or a security risk analytics.
Okay. Yeah, I learned, I think, pretty early on in my career, two important questions: the if you're talking about people understanding or not understanding risk analytics, the two questions are always so what and who cares. So I think certainly risk analytics, the individuals responsible for that area right now are dealing with that. So what and who cares? Can you translate the data that we're collecting, really in some cases very granular data, technical data from across a lot of different functions, translate that into something that is going to help business decision makers do a better job? So with that in mind, I mentioned a little bit some of the contextual analysis being how do you deliver data to different stakeholders in a way that's helpful for them. But maybe next you can talk a little bit about how you see the consumers of risk analytics changing. Is it just the risk manager, just the the IT security or financial risk or operational risk people, or do you see some of that changing over time?
Yes, that's an interesting way to look at, or interesting question. And if I look at the audience or the users community for a risk analytics platform, we would think what we've talked so far is we're looking at maybe the top, the business executives or the top tier. But in fact, it's actually a pretty broader user community. If you look at a particular use case, for example, of a technology risk management, and traditionally you have, from a operational folks, technology operations or security operations, and you also have risk analysts, information risk officers helping and assisting business, and then you go up the chain, and they all are essentially benefiting from a platform. So it has a pretty wider application and a user base. So if you look at in a little bit more detail, and I'll walk you through as I said, a use case where we can see who are the different actors involved, what do they do today, and how do they benefit from a risk analytical approach to looking at their data. So if you go to the next slide. Yeah, if you go one more, yes. So here, this is a typical technology risk sort of a program. There are different actors involved. You have security operations. If you look at very much on the right-hand side, you're looking at a very infrastructure level reporting that is happening. Different teams, maybe at the network layer, maybe at the system layer. They're running controls monitoring tools today. Generally, they're dealing with the scanners and SIM tools or identity and access management, independent of where that information, how is that information used by risk. They're very much in the weeds and actually getting things done. You also have at the application layer, you have folks coming in and doing applications and risk assessments. And then the people responsible for remediation, people with risk owners or data owners also involved in that. And you have third party and their representatives, and either it's a vendor application where you are doing sort of scanning or pen testing of that, or it's just a vendor relationship that's being managed. So that audience or that group is also present. We talked about compliance and policy folks there as well. So people from a governance point of view, people who are actually putting the requirements out and then monitoring the results. So they have their requirements and metrics. And then, sitting on top of it is your executives, both from business side. So you have CIOs and CIO -1s, and you have risk executives and risk liaisons and so on and so forth. So without really going into each and every bullet and talking about it, this diagram, this use case is a very common use case for us, where we see different types of data coming together. And again, tying back to a single source of truth, single repository, physically and also logically, to collect this information. And so we're feeding, you're looking at all your application data. You have SLAs, you have business continuity information, you have some financial, legal, open source software licenses, all that kind of information, vendor information associated with that. Then you have infrastructure related information. And then another big thing we see in our customers is sometimes is referred as user-defined technologies or end-user-defined applications. These are your spreadsheets. These are your SharePoint folders, which most of the time go unaccounted for, and there's a very high number of them out there where people are using them. They have sensitive data, they have some calculations defined or processing. You could be a loan officer and you have it built a little application within an Excel spreadsheet, which nobody's really looking at it and it's not monitored. So we tend to get that data in. And there's some other, as I talked about, the HR type of information, the user, the business hierarchy, and then the frameworks that you're following, and then the data coming from bottom up, which is all of your operational security operation, technology operational data. And so the analytics here is collecting all this information, correlating it, so you can tie applications to servers and databases, and so their infrastructure components, users using them, users who are responsible for them or take ownership, business units or line of businesses or products that these apps are supporting, frameworks and standards from both regulatory point of view and also from your own internal policy management point of view. You're overlaying that on top, so that's another set of requirements coming in. And again, all the actual controls monitoring that is happening, which this data is rarely used to do a high-level risk analysis. Is predominantly used for security intelligence, but not really looking at the business aspect of it. So when you put it all together, then you have a very consolidated analysis where you have looked at all different dimensions. So it's not a single dimensional, not even two-dimensional. It's actually a multi-dimensional view of your risk information. So if you're an operation person, you're only looking at things from a technology point of view, you can do that, and you can look at in a consistent manner because the things are, the data is actually correlated and analyzed, or you have calculated and you have implemented a risk scoring methodology that has incorporated all these different aspects together. So now you're providing different views to operational folks, you're providing different views to your risk and compliance, you're providing different views to your management, and everybody is getting to see what they need to do to make better decisions. The interesting thing here is that you're not changing the data, you're not changing your risk model. All you're doing is providing a view, which is a context. You talk about contextualization. It's in context to the person who's looking at it, and it's the same information. However, it's presented in a very sort of a relevant way to help them to make the decisions they need to make. Either it's what vulnerabilities we need to remediate. Now you're not just looking at all the vulnerabilities reported by, for example, Qualys or White Hat or HP. Now you're looking at really the vulnerabilities on systems that are supporting critical applications that are public-facing, have financial information, have access. Third-party vendors are coming in and have access to it as well, and it's supporting a very critical business process. Either it's your wealth management, either it's some other line of business that is using this. So now, when you put it all together, it is a true representation of a risk versus Qualys team going and trying to fix every issue that they have, and from an application risk and compliance only looking at app controls, and they're trying to fix everything that they can, which they think is on a 1 to 5 scale. They pick their 5s. Everybody is picking their 5s or 10s. At the end, it's a lot of work that's created, and which can be reduced significantly if we actually correlate and combine it all. Does that make sense, Chris?
Yeah, a lot of stuff there, but I think it makes a lot of sense. I think the key thing for me was all of these different use cases. You have to think about how all this information comes together, and then move it from, as you say, taking this vulnerability scanner or assessment data and turning that into good decisions, right? So I think next up we'll talk a little bit about business context and specifically risk prioritization.
Absolutely. So if we move to the next slide, Hilda, I think I'll use that as a example. And so now this use case we just talked about a little bit. What do you get out of it? We talked a lot about reports, and we talked about a lot about the business context. Now this, and again, if you look at this particular report, this is an example dashboard. The target audience is is in this particular use case is somebody who is responsible for who owns an application or a risk officer or risk information risk manager and assisting business in determining. Now, we do a lot of that aggregation and correlation, and the scores have been calculated, or the criticality of the application or the risk is established. Now, one of the things, Chris, you said, one of the things you learn early in your career is, okay, well, it's red, so what? Why do I care about it? And even if it's red, application is red, I have so many of these here, I cannot possibly go and try to fix everything here. So what do I do about it? That's a typical business response. And now if you look at the threshold, this line, this black sort of mark line that goes horizontally, every business, there's a threshold that's established. You could establish and say, you know what, I am okay up to 20% of my portfolio, either applications or systems, being in that, high risk state, because based on my resources, based on my criteria, based on my threshold, I'm okay to live with that kind of risk, because that's, we're doing something for the growth market, we're doing some new and innovative stuff, and we understand that there is going to be a certain amount of risk that we need to assume, and that's what you're doing. So now suddenly you have taken something which was very generic and really made it specific to that line of business. And now I'm responsible for consumer banking. I can see that there's really one application that is over my limit or outside that threshold that we have set up. So if you really, then you can focus on, on that and address it. The other quick way to look at this information, again, we're not trying to overwhelm the target user and give them every vulnerability. All of this is consolidated, correlated, and aggregated at different tiers. But the second layer, you can see different areas of different control areas or different requirements that you have for your application, for example. Then you can see, well, okay, well, I have all these applications. Well, what exactly is wrong with each and every application? And here you can, it's broken down into different areas, and all these are essentially configurable, but you can quickly see, validation when it comes to application. We don't seem to have a good process for validation, and there's about 10 applications that are critical of my portfolio, and 42 have a high score. So really, looking at this, I've come to a conclusion very, very quickly that it's really the validation issues that I need to address. And I can perhaps live with IT strategy and planning, the access administration issues, because they don't seem to have that bigger impact on my overall portfolio, overall risk posture. So again, business context allows you to get to a very quick decision-making process, and now you have a very small set of risks or issues that you need to remediate, or may not need to remediate. You may be able to live with it based on your business needs, and now you're not getting 21 different reports from 21 different areas or 52 different applications that are all reporting different things. It's all been correlated and consolidated for your consumption. So again, this is just an example, but it should show, it shows that how analytics benefits the overall decision-making process. And if we go to the next slide, I think we have a couple of examples of the similar type of information. And again, if you look at this, we're not just saying, you have 20% of your systems are missing patches, but if you look at the systems with missing patches example here, we're actually providing the systems overall. So if a server has its overall score is critical, or its overall score is high, within that, show me how many patches are missing. So now you, again, and then you can filter it by line of business, or you filter it by location or data center. So you really are saying, show me the systems by a particular line of business, or they're supporting a wealth management business that are SOX critical. You can filter about that, have missing patches, or you can also look at, for example, average patch time. So now you're not just reporting a metric that is very operational in nature. You're tying it back to a business. That's the key thing. That's the contextualization we've been talking about. And same thing by data center. You can look at things, and again, these are examples. But again, as you can see here, you're not just throwing out some numbers. They actually are relevant to the business, and that's what analytics is all about. I think we have some more examples if we quickly go through them. again, trending is pretty key here. You can see how you're doing from year to year, month to month, and you can look at by in each individual area as well. Next slide. Okay, so, and again, we have some couple of use cases, but in the interest of time, I'm just going to stop here and then turn it over to Chris if just get your thoughts and see if that made sense.
Well, yeah, so everything makes sense. I think one of the things that is challenging for me when I work with customers is that this all seems straightforward, right? It all seems like you're delivering information to the right people at the right time, and we've been through these kind of things before with HR, with finance, with operations, and so forth. But I think you mentioned earlier that you had a case study example. So I think if there's a way that just maybe quickly before we get back to QA, if you can get into a case example of how specifically this kind of a process, this kind of a technology and structure can actually have real life benefits, I think that'd be really helpful for the audience.
Absolutely. So let's go to the case study example. Now this is a global financial. Actually, if you could skip a couple of slides and get to the case study slide, please. Thank you. So this is a world largest deposit bank. They have the technology risk group, technology risk management group, is responsible for assisting business across 20 odd different areas and to help with the understand the risk when it comes to technology and also provide recommendation on how to go and remediate and or accept risk in different cases. They face quite a few challenges. And again, if you were wondering or you're thinking that that's only relevant because this is a large bank, we may be using this case study, but it's actually pretty relevant that I've seen from any sort of small institutions, small companies to large companies. So there's a pretty relevant should be relevant to you as well. Anyway, so the number one, again, the biggest issue was that they were providing very much operational metrics back to business, and it wasn't, it didn't make sense. And again, in some cases where they did go back and build the business focused metrics, it's a very long process. You would take 6 to 8 weeks to build that, and sometimes longer, and it's not a very repeatable process. Once you have that, you cannot also assist. They weren't able to assist a business with the remediation side of it. Assign accountable people, who is responsible, what is the recommendation, what's the standard workflow that you should follow, and also track the progress as well. Their inventories are a little bit weak, and they're not accurate in some cases because there's a lack of governance processes around it. If somebody needs to engage with the TRM group, the overall hooks or the triggers or the gatekeeping from either it's a project management office or other groups, it's not very well defined, or it wasn't very well defined. So how many services you need to evaluate for for a given project, it wasn't really clear. And then you obviously have other issues where you have so many of these services, each of them is rated, ranked, scored, and reported separately. So these are some of the challenges that they've faced. Again, nothing that should surprise anybody. It's a pretty consistent what I see. So if you go to the next slide, it also shows the same in a bit more graphical way. Different starting points and different triggers for starting the process. As you can see, it's kind of a map where people are, based on who they know or on a reactionary approach or part of the SDLC process, gauge the technology risk and conduct an application security, or you may do a ethical hack, but it's very inconsistent on what's actually getting done. And then you have a set of tools that are performing a part of the actual assessment. Not everybody has all the pieces of it. So again, you have this one assessment in case or one project split over multiple tools and generating different issues, different exceptions, different outcomes, different reports. It's a real messy situation to really get a sense of where we are and what we're doing from a risk point of view within technology. But let's look at quickly the solution aspect of it. So we now implemented, Brinqa, a risk analytics platform for them. So number one is a process as well as a technology to consolidate the different risk inventories and provide a governance process, keep it up to date and maintain. So it improves the quality. But now they know what do they have and what do they need to assess risk on, what are the important assets applications. We talked about the process as well. Now, single process for 21 different assessment services, so you don't have to go to Lotus Notes, so you don't have to go to Cheese or their GRC tool for different things. It's all done in Brinqa in a single standard way. Not only the assessment is streamlined, but the outcome of the issues, the exceptions, the risks that are actually discovered. And the big thing, a big change, was actually utilize the operational and almost never used as part of. So, Chris, I think you said that we probably will never be able to go fully automated. There will still be some manual assessment aspect of it. However, it was 100%. Now there is some manual assessments in place. They probably will be there for a little longer, but we're utilizing as much risk, actual operational data as possible. So you're not just asking, thousands and hundreds of questions on these surveys. You're asking very small set of questions. You're asking and utilizing and coming up with the controlled scores and different relationship scores, dependency scores, and with the true risk picture as exists. And because of being in a single sort of repository and a single place, and you now can look at your historical data. Now you can look at the trend, actually track progress, and that allows you to also look at forecasting, and so you start with additional. So not only you fix what was broken, there are some additional benefits that they're gaining out of it at this point. So I think if we move to the next slide, it shows similar diagram from previous, but streamlined, more processes, simplified processes perhaps, but a single process, but all the different triggers or entry points now go through a single system, single process that includes different assessment data from either operations or from risk and compliance that also incorporates with their GRC system. So in places or in cases where you have something already done, so you're not reinventing the wheel, and the outcome is that there are different users. The management is looking at a single or set of dashboards to get a very true and a very accurate picture when it comes to technology risk, either by project, by application, and by different line of businesses and different assets. And there's consumers, and as I listed them on the screen, the different consumers. Some information goes back to the GRC, sort of the side of the house, the tooling. Some is for the information technology, information risk officers, and the business. It has tremendously improved the reporting, added a lot more business context, and streamlined the process and saved a lot of resources and enabled business to now focus on even technology and security, to actually focus on innovative things versus trying to repeat the cycle, month after month, year after year. Chris?
Well, I guess we have some audience questions, but maybe before we get to that, just kind of curious with this large bank. I tend to think of financial services as usually being relatively mature in the way they think about analytics and how they put the processes together. But maybe if you could give the audience your impression of what's the best place to start? With all these different potential initiatives, these potential use cases, what is your recommendation for how they get going with something like this?
Yeah, I think on one hand, I do agree, Chris, what you said about the larger organization being mature. Definitely, I think the maturity is the understanding and the thought process and the vision. Maybe not so much in the actual implementation. I think there's a desire that they need to achieve a true risk analytical approach or analytical approach to solving risk problems. And as I said, there are a lot of technical challenges that exist today. And starting with, I think I mentioned before, but I can't emphasize enough to build an inherent risk inventory. The very first steps is you have to consolidate your risk repositories into a single. You need to build that risk, almost like a risk database. That, which also has a lot of business information in it. A lot of organizations struggle with the CMDB aspect of it, or you have perhaps an application inventory, but you don't really know where this application runs on, what systems or servers, what database, what's there, what data centers they're deploying. It's very rare that an application owner actually knows where his application is running. So I would say if somebody's looking to start, this is the area that should focus at that and pick a couple of data sources. Don't have to go all out and try to do every possible, bring in every data source, but pick 2 or 3 critical data sources. Find your critical applications, your SOX relevant, your business-facing application, business critical application. Pick them and implement this process end-to-end. Engage your business early. Make sure they understand the dashboard and reports. They're getting the metrics they need. And you go and expand this program to add more and more data as it becomes available.
Well, just with the time that we have left, I think it's time to turn it back over to Woody to see if there's any questions and questions from the audience that we might be able to address.
Great. Well, thank you, Chris and Ahmad. At this time, we will be taking questions from the audience. Again, you can submit your questions through the questions box in your webinar window. This first question is for Chris. You spoke about efficiencies. Can you address what your clients and or your thoughts around build versus buy?
So yeah, build versus buy from an analytics perspective is tough. I think Ahmad made some great points about when you're starting off on this journey, there are some things that you can't necessarily build completely yourself, but you do have to start with making sure that the process, the definitions, the nomenclature, that central taxonomy are all clear. So you have to build that foundational element from a perspective of nomenclature, terminology, and process, first of all. You do get to a point in many of these cases that the ability to build your own aggregation capabilities and normalization capabilities is very difficult. So certainly some of the larger organizations I've worked with, they do have a very large internal development staff that have very good BI capabilities and analytics capabilities. If they have those, and then they also have really good risk experts internally that really understand how to roll up risk, quantified risk data. I think it's possible to build a lot of this stuff yourself, but it's rare that organizations have that kind of capability, and usually those internal resources are pretty well heads down on other projects. So for the larger organizations even, when they have big initiatives to do risk analytics across multiple domains, across a large environment, oftentimes they do see the buy as the more efficient approach.
Great, thank you. This question is for Ahmad. What would you say is the most prevalent problem you solve for your customers regarding risk analytics?
I would say the number one problem that you would be able to solve is provide better or intelligent or business context specific in reporting for decision makers. I can't emphasize that enough. I had one of the customers who actually a senior executive sits on the board, and his comments were that the reason I love this, obviously he He doesn't really know about all the aggregations and what has happened underneath, but he knows that he has access to the reports on his iPad when he goes to a board meeting, and he can answer those questions right there, right then. He doesn't have to ask somebody where that person runs around, gets data collected, and combines them together and takes 6 to 8 weeks to get back. It makes him look smart. It makes him look intelligent, and that's, I think, is probably the number one, that you're enabling the decision makers to make their decisions. Woody?
Oh, one more question for Ahmad. Does your solution allow for relationship hierarchies?
Absolutely. Our solution is actually a bit different when it comes to some of the other solutions perhaps you have seen in the market. We have a very different approach. We have what we call is a graph-based model. So if you're familiar with Facebook or LinkedIn, it's a data model where we have different entities built out and linked together with different relationships. So absolutely, we allow with that, and it's a very configurable solution.
Well, thank you, Ahmad. We have reached the end of our hour. Thank you for all your questions. I would like to thank again Chris and Ahmad for their insights on risk analytics. Thank you all for attending today's session. This concludes our webinar on Beyond Security, Everyday Risk Analytics.